Item 2. Distinguished delegate. I now invite the committee to consider agenda item 2, sub-item C, follow up on the midterm evaluation of the UNCCD 2018-2030 strategic framework, for which you have before you document ICCD/COP15/2 and ICCD/COP15/21. I now give the floor to the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat to introduce the document ICCD/COP15/2 under agenda item 2, sub-item C, follow-up of the midterm evaluation of the UNCCD 2018-2030 strategic framework. Mr. Satorabola, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. At its 13th session, the Conference of the Parties adopted the UNCCD 2018-2030 strategic framework and encouraged parties to apply this strategic framework in their national policies, programs, plans, and processes relating to desertification, land degradation, and drought. Same COP also assigned its bureau to prepare appropriate modalities, criteria, and terms of reference for a midterm evaluation of the UNCCD 2018-2030 strategic framework, with the view to their adoption at the 14th session of the Conference of the Parties. The COP Bureau worked accordingly and presented to COP14 its proposal for the midterm evaluation. That COP welcomed and provisionally adopted the proposal by the Bureau. COP14 decided that preparations for the midterm evaluation will be continued at COP16, and that by that time, the Bureau should review and, as needed, update the modalities, criteria, and terms of reference for the midterm evaluation. Furthermore, COP14 provided some elements for the Bureau to consider when conducting the review of the provisionally adopted modalities, criteria, and terms of reference for the midterm evaluation. In addition, COP14 requested the Bureau to inform parties at COP15 about the ongoing discussions on preparing for the midterm evaluation, with the view to gathering further elements and identifying priorities for its proposal on the modalities, criteria, and terms of reference. This information, together with the elements provided by COP14, is presented in the document that I am introducing now. The information and elements concern the evaluation criteria, the scope of the assessment of effectiveness, and specific aspects of the independent assessment that will form the first component of the midterm evaluation. In addition to guiding on the potential additional information and elements, COP14 decided to include in the preparation of the midterm evaluation the establishment of an intergovernmental working group to oversee the evaluation process, and requested the Bureau to outline the terms of reference for this intergovernmental working group, including its purpose, composition, and main working modalities for consideration at COP16. Let me just conclude by summarizing that the work carried out so far to prepare for the midterm evaluation has provided a solid basis to move forward. We have a provisionally adopted terms of reference, which has been reviewed in detail at COP14 and also received detailed guidance at that COP. We also know that the midterm evaluation would be overseen by an intergovernmental working group with the guidance of the COP Bureau. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Robola, for your statement. I will now like to open the floor for any statements in connection with the report that was just introduced. Speaker, I request to keep statements brief and concise so that I can give the floor to as many speakers as possible. I will take all comments and then give the floor to the Secretariat to respond. Delegate wishing to take the floor are invited to press the button. Are there any delegates wishing to take the floor, please? China, please take the floor.
谢谢主席，感谢秘书处以及有关单位的工作。中方认为，2017年在中国举办的公约第13次缔约方大会上通过的2018至2030年公约战略框架是公约重要成果。对这一成果开展科学的、全面的中期评估，有利于推动公约的良性发展。 对设定公约下一阶段的工作重点具有重要意义。中方作为公约主席团成员，愿积极参与建立特设工作组等相关工作，推动中期评估的顺利启动。谢谢主席。
Thank you, distinguished delegate. Nigeria, please. Nigeria, please, you have the floor. Any other delegates take the floor, please? Estimate, please press the button, please.
Merci. Merci de me donner la parole. Attend avec intérêt de fixer les modalités et les termes de référence définitifs de l'évaluation à mi-parcours et d'examiner le mandat du L'Union européenne salue également l'inclusion de l'impact concernés au-delà des institutions et organes de la Convention. L'Union européenne de veiller à ce que la composition du groupe de travail intergouvernemental reste de taille modérée, que le groupe ne devienne pas trop coûteux et qu'il prenne en compte la représentation géographique ainsi que l'équilibre
participation of civil society without this actually jeopardizing technical expertise. And finally, the EU asks the Secretary to include estimated resource needs for the midterm evaluation in its program and budget for 2024 to 2025. Thank you.
Estimate delegate. Any other request, please? I have the floor. Argentina, please.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the Secretariat for its introduction to the document. the delegation of Argentina wishes to recall that we're already halfway through the 2018-2030 strategic framework period. And to be honest, we were expecting or are expecting that at this juncture we might have greater effect in terms of funding for convention implementation activities. We've developed important inputs regarding methodologies and land degradation neutrality framework, including issues such as mitigating the effects of drought. And we've also integrated various issues pertaining to the drivers of desertification, such as land tenure, gender and other aspects. And Argentina will cooperate in designing this midterm evaluation, but it will also continue to work to secure the necessary funds to strengthen and boost the implementation of this convention. Thank you.
Estimate delegate for Argentina. Please, South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the floor. And thank for the Secretariat for preparing the documents. Mr. Chair, at COP14, as this collective, we provisionally adopted modalities, criteria, and terms of reference for the mid-evaluation of the UNCCT 2018 to 2030 strategic framework. The purpose of this midterm evaluation is to assess the progress made in implementing the strategic framework and its 5 strategic objectives. With that, Chair, we are looking the proposal by the Secretariat to establish the Intergovernmental Working Group, including its purpose, composition, and main working modalities, as this will determine if the strategic framework is meeting the stated objectives and whether it is contributing to broader global priorities of sustainable development. Africa is of the view that the strategic framework is an important tool to guide the implementation of the convention because it supports measures that will be considered in the implementation of the strategy as well as in the reporting and review process of the convention. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Estimate Delegate. Please, Guinea. Guinea, you have the floor. Thank you. Estimate delegate from Mexico, please.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico acknowledges and appreciates the work of the Intergovernmental Working Group that has prepared the text of the midterm evaluation, taking into account criteria and assessment criteria, and it supports the inclusion of other elements and priorities for the midterm evaluation with criteria pertaining to the relevance of the work to implement the convention in recovering from the post-COVID-19 pandemic and the involvement of intergovernmental processes which are also related to the convention, such as the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration for 2021 to 2030. At the country level, we support the midterm evaluation, which will allow each country to assess its own progress made in implementation and also having criteria for such a discussion. Thank you.
From Mexico. I thank you all for your statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat to respond. Oh, sorry. India, please have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for the Secretariat for coming up with the document. India welcomed the midterm evaluation report, and we are very keenly seeing that this UNCCD 2018-2030 strategic framework is the main tool and the backbone of the whole convention. The whole convention revolves around the strategic framework, and it gives a tool for implementation, reviewing, and reporting of all the work that this UNCCD convention does. So therefore, we give very high importance for the strategic framework, which was taken up in the COP13, and it was the terms of reference and the modalities and evaluation criteria was much more made during the COP14. So during the COP14, there was a lot of deliberation on the strategic framework. So now we are expecting that the Secretariat, as well as all the COP members, they should come up with the midterm evaluation where we see where this convention is heading for. All the commitment made by the different countries, whether it is for the land degradation utility, whether it is for transformative projects or it is for legacy projects, every country has come up with a lot of commitment. But at the same time, now it is for the Secretariat to review the midterm evaluation and the final evaluation that we are seeing in COP16, we say. It should be very critically reviewed and evaluated which country is heading towards the land degradation neutrality and combating desertification, land degradation, and drought. We give a lot of importance to the strategic framework, and India will be happy to be part of the intergovernmental working group on this strategic framework. At the same time, we will urge that this terms of reference must be scientifically robust and technologically feasible, and at the same time, it must be very ambitious so that the convention is on the right path to achieve its goal by 2030 by land degradation neutrality. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Estimate Delegate. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat to respond to the questions and comments from the floor. Mr. Rabola, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, sir. I would like to simply thank you all for the comments and the information, and I look very much forward to hearing further from you and your consultations at the contact group. Thank you so much.
I thank Mr. Rabola for her statements. We have just heard the last speaker on the list and have thus concluded the general discussion of Agenda Item 2, Sub-Item C. I invite the committee to continue its consideration of Agenda Item 4, entitled Policy Frameworks and Thematic Issues, with the issue Migration. The committee has before it documents ICCD/COP15/18 and ICCD/COP15/21. I now give the floor to the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat to introduce the document ICCD/COP15/18. Mr. Sasha Alexander, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, document ICCD COP15/18 provides a summary of the actions taken by the Secretariat in response to Decision 22, COP14, to support regional and international cooperation and initiatives that aim to promote the positive role of sustainable land management and that what it can play to address desertification, land degradation, and drought as one of the drivers that causes migration. In response to requests for support from parties, the Secretariat and the Global Mechanism, 1, commissioned a study for Central Asia to provide evidence on the role of DLDD in driving out migration in the region, specifically to assess the impact of land use practices on migration at the national and regional level, including in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The study specifically aims to evaluate the prospects for creating new jobs by promoting sustainable agricultural practices and improving the skills of rural youth and migrants returning to these countries. It will also demonstrate how land-based green growth and sustainable value chains can build a social safety net for rural populations through job creation, alternative incomes, and disincentives for mass out-migration and land abandonment. 2, another study for the Western Balkans developed a theoretical model to leverage remittances and diaspora investments in land restoration and sustainable land management in the region. In partnership with the IOM, International Organization for Migration, Regional Office in Vienna, the Secretariat is supporting the investigation of the DLDD migration nexus and the potential role of the diaspora in financing land restoration activities. It will explore developing a financing mechanism with a business model, customer engagement plan, and projected economic and financial returns, including an analysis of the incentives, monetary and non-monetary, and other complementary financial resources needed. With regards to regional and international cooperation and initiatives, the Secretariat and the GM have developed several partnerships and cooperation agreements, most notably with the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, in providing support to the Sustainability, Stability, and Security Initiative, the 3S Initiative. Implementation responsibility and governance oversight for the 3S Initiative has now been incorporated into IFAD's multilateral structures under the new Rural Resilience Program. Efforts have been made to strengthen cross-sectoral cooperation with other United Nations agencies and programs, regional and international organizations, and stakeholders to share information on the linkages between DLDD and migration. This includes a working relationship with the policy, legislation, and governance section of UN Habitat. Activities will focus on supporting parties in revising national and subnational rural, urban, and territorial policy frameworks. A pilot project has been initiated with the United Nations Environment Program, to demonstrate the urban-rural linkages concept in connection with LDN and SLM within the framework of the Changwon Initiative's Greening Drylands Partnership. Climate risk, migration, and increased insecurity continue to be high on the political agenda, with land restoration and efforts to restore terrestrial ecosystems seen as a key measure for stabilizing climate-vulnerable communities. For example, the Secretariat continues to contribute to the Climate Security Mechanism, a coordination mechanism for climate and security housed within the United Nations Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Draft elements for a decision on migration are contained in document ICCD COP 15/21 for the consideration of the parties. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for your statement. I now open the floor for any statement in connection with the report that was just introduced. Speaker, I request to keep a statement brief and concise so that I can give the floor to as many speakers as possible. I will take all comments and then give the floor to the Secretariat to respond. Delegate, wishing to take the floor are invited to press the button. Union Europe, please. Yes. No. Thank you. Please, you have the floor.
Good morning. My name is Chabwa Bukego, NFINN. I come from Cameroon. I am the CSO's panel officer for Africa to the convention. I would like to...
Excuse me, estimate delegate from Cameroon. Please, you have the floor, please. Thank you. Union, please. You can speak from another microphone, please. Move another seat. Move, please. Move another seat. All of them is closed. Oh, I'm so sorry. Come in front, please.
Vous m'entendez? Oui. OK. Merci.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the EU and its 27 member states. Firstly, the European Union and its member states welcome the work conducted by the Secretariat of the Convention on combating desertification, land degradation and drought, which are factors in migration and displacement, and the Secretariat has worked on promoting sustainable land development measures and anti-drought measures which have environmental, economic and social advantages. Nonetheless, we cannot forget, especially at this time, the problems of conflicts and their effects on migration and displacement. We think of the peoples of Ukraine and other countries exposed to conflict. We cannot address other migration drivers and displacement drivers without achieving peace. And we commend and encourage cooperation with UN bodies and other international organizations that are relevant to environment, climate change, migration and labor, especially the International Organization for Migration, the IOM. We also note the support provided by the Secretariat and the global mechanism to the Great Green Wall initiative for the Sahel and Sahara and the Sustainability Initiative, which underlies the work done by the Secretariat, contributing to develop opportunities, economic opportunities for girls, women, youth, and vulnerable groups in rural areas by restoring degraded land. We support the initiative extended to the parties to strengthen ties between urban and rural areas in order to create economic opportunities, especially by giving the wherewithal to the vulnerable populations, including those living in rural areas and women, indigenous people in local communities, youth, and people with disabilities. The aim being to facilitate access to land security. We strongly encourage the Convention to collect and disseminate data on the links between desertification and migration and to promote better use of existing data in determining policies and activities to combat insecurity and displacement. Those policies should also deal with the deep-lying causes and increase social and environmental resilience. With this in mind, we believe that it's important for the Convention to continue its technical support for the parties in monitoring the impact of desertification on vulnerable groups, especially by developing methodologies and indicators allowing the parties to identify vulnerable groups who are prone to displacement in order to target measures to increase resilience. And lastly, we would like to emphasize the request made to the global mechanism to produce recommendations on the feasibility of a funding mechanism to tap into the resources of the diasporas, because the development of investment and entrepreneurship is one of the key aspects here. And we call on the Secretariat to develop ways and means to assess the effectiveness of such a process. Thank you.
You know, please, delegate, you have the floor. Please press the button, please. China, please, take the floor.
好，谢谢主。
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We, in principle, endorse the conclusion of the document. We'd like to emphasize that parties have different land degradation and land management regulations. We should fully respect the national conditions of parties. In China, based on the willing of the local people, we have undertaken proactive, organized ecological migration to avoid desertified land from further degradation due to overpopulation. We're against and have prevented passive and displaced climate migration. Therefore, we welcome that the resolution retained the word compel to reflect the passiveness of this meaning and clarify the meaning of migration to avoid misunderstanding.
China. San Lucia, you have the floor, please.
Yeah, now you can. Again. Yes,
No, I'm not sure there.
Can we speak as CSOs?
No, San Lucia, please. Have the floor. I give the floor to the Minister of Argentina, please. Minister, please press the button.
Ahora sí. Muchas
Thank you very much, Chair. We'd like to thank the Secretariat, in particular for this document. We agree that land degradation and drought are driving factors, multipliers of migration, key factors in that. We believe that the magnitude, the characters, and the impact of migration mean that we need to take action. And when you couple that with drought and land degradation caused by drought, that we do not have sufficient data to measure what's going on. We therefore value any data that can be gathered by UNCCD, but also partner organizations such as the IOM, civil society organizations, and the private sector. There's a need to pursue further studies in the various areas affected by the phenomenon of desertification. For example, Latin America and the Caribbean, the southern part of the South American continent, in order to be able to map the scale of this phenomenon and its consequence. This lack of data that we have currently and the shortcoming that we need to plug affects the entire world, and so there's a pressing need to move immediately to an in-depth study and an in-depth collection and collation of data. Strategic steps and strategies and strategic studies need to make sure that we can analyze the impact of the issues that we're dealing with mitigation and take steps to mitigate the impact of these environmental factors. Because if we do not do so, then we will open the door to unplanned, undesired migration, which will give rise to major problems, in particular for the Republic of Argentina, which is a host country for migrants, and that will hold true for Latin America writ large. Intersectoral cooperation is, as far as Argentina is concerned, vital. We need to share information, and we need to map out the links between migration from urban to rural areas and vice versa, and to see how much this is tied with drought and desertification. We're already carrying out this work, or beginning this work, in Argentina, spurred by the fact that we have played host to a large number of migrants in recent terms, not just coming from Latin America and the Caribbean, but from other regions as well, including Africa. The study of the link between climate risk and security and how this drives migration is vital data that we need to have to hand in order to plan properly our response to desertification, land degradation, and drought, and to make sure that we take prior action before we have to deal on the back foot with the consequences, particularly that of large-scale unplanned migration. We also need to take steps to how we can deal with migration populations, respecting the environment when we do so, but also upholding the human rights of migrants. That's a critical factor that needs to be borne in mind. And we therefore think it would be timely to suggest that we continue working on studies on this particular issue. It would be helpful if studies such as those planned could be carried out across the board in all parties, in Argentina and Latin America and the Caribbean. The northwest part of the country is that most affected by drought and desertification. And in the context of cooperation and furthering the work of this COP, dealing with issues such as these at the regional, national level is vital. We would like to congratulate, therefore, on this initiative, and it is our cherished hope that at the end of this COP15 we will have a set of decisions that are useful and that will redound to the benefit of all on this particular issue, and that will serve as a basis for us to be able to understand and map out the dramatic plight of forced migration, its sheer scale, what drives it, etc. Thank you very much.
Argentina, please, representative for society, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am Chabwa Bukengo, NFINN. I come from Cameroon. I represent the African CSOs to the convention. So I belong to I'm one among the 5 panel members of the CSOs. So I will be making a short talk about migration and desertification. I will just read from what we all agreed on. Migration will never end. It continued and it goes along with its challenges. We, as a people, must intervene very strongly in dealing with its challenges, its consequences in the departing and receiving ends. Now, in Africa, the spread of desertification is a continuous. The spread of desertification and the continuous degradation of lands for agriculture and other land use activities has rendered many communities with challenges which have led to the following: conflicts for political reasons, struggle on land resources, agricultural lands, grazing lands, farming lands, and more. Young people unable to support the economic situation and increasing poverty. Women finding difficulty in supporting and feeding their children, families, and are living in poverty. The economic challenges of low productivity of lands and disappearing resources. The United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, which was purposely coined to address these challenges, is doing its best to discuss these challenges, opportunities, and the pain desertification and drought causes to people, communities, and especially to migrants and their families. We believe that some more effort is needed by the Convention to address these challenges. The country parties on their part recognizes these too, and especially the role played by individuals, civil society groups, and other stakeholders in addressing the challenges of migration and desertification. We of the civil society cannot bear to hear and see the challenges even further. To recount on the many young men and women who die of thirst and the heat across the Sahara Desert, trying to cross it, the challenges on the Mediterranean Sea and the repeated deaths, much more is needed, especially on the level of implementation in achieving the resolutions arrived at COP and CRIP meetings. The civil society recognizes the need of stronger synergy and partnerships among everyone and leaving no one behind in addressing the challenges of migration and seeking for a stronger synergy and partnerships among country parties and other stakeholders. In this aspect, the CSOs are of the opinion that civil society at country levels be supported directly in their activities through direct funding of accredited organizations. To this effect, it is necessary to organize 2 conferences annually where over 20 civil society organizations per country are directly supported to continue their works. It is estimated that the challenges of land tenure, land rights, conflicts, gender challenges, increased food production, and restoring degraded lands and ecosystems could be greatly achieved. On migration, we call for more synergies and partnership with other UN agencies and programs, regional and international organizations, civil society organizations, and all stakeholders to share understanding of urban-rural linkages with a focus on land degradation neutrality and addressing the drivers of forced migration. We believe also strongly that taking the implementation issue seriously will go a long way to end the suffering of the people, to achieve the purpose for which the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification was formed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mendelegay. Please, Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mexico, consideramos que cualquier...
We're of the view that any international migration policy that we needs to be developed taking into account real conditions. If it doesn't take into account the underlying causes that drive migrants to leave their home areas, and if it doesn't take into account national and sub-regional factors, then it will be doomed to failure. The broad experience that we have as a result of, in terms of migration pushed by desertification, drought, and land degradation in Mexico, towards other territories, other lands, as well as domestically, means that we've been in a position to put in forward major federal programs to improve the conditions of those who remain behind and those who have not migrated from those, such as the 3-1 migrants, the Youth Rural Entrepreneurship Program, Solidarity for Women, etc. We developed some of these programs in the past. We also have, and as a result of our past work, we have one of the most updated and largest reforestation programs in the country, which has had ramifications for other countries in Central America. It has also boosted rural employment and has also ensured that we can restore for agriculture and fishery progresses previously degraded land. We'd like to call on the support of the Secretariat and the global mechanism in order to update our study on migration caused by land degradation and to expand same to Central America. We thank you for the support that's been given in the previous such study. Thank you.
From Mexico, India, have the floor, please.
Desertification, land degradation, and drought act as one of the drivers of the cause of migration. Other factor includes climate and environmental changes. Promotion of sustainable agriculture and its associated value chain offers promising avenues to stop out migration of rural population. Linking rural urban communities and developmental action to address migration was initiated in Decision 22 COP14. ICC/COP15/18 concludes that in rural area affected by desertification, land degradation, and drought, livelihood opportunity through land restoration activities should be ensured. Integrated land use planning together with enhancing green and blue infrastructure for sustainable development should be prioritized. A strong symbolic urban-rural linkage targeting vulnerable groups that includes women, rural youth, refugees, and internally displaced persons be provided with on-farm and off-farm employment. Youth are most likely to face migration, and engaging youth is vital to restoration effort for resilient and sustainable food system. In India, Office of the Registrar General and Census Commissioner under the Ministry of Home Affairs is the designated authority in India that compiles all the information on migration based on data compiled during national census. They usually take place at a gap of 10 years time interval. So that also includes migration due to various issues like land degradation, desertification, drought, and climate and environmental changes. Reducing the extent of human migration is one of the most pronounced achievements of our watershed development programs being implemented by Department of Land Resources, Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India. About 60% of the amount spent in each of the watershed goes for the labor component, which generates substantial employment for the local landless, small, marginal farming communities and people. Use of machinery in the watershed activity is kept to the minimum so that employment opportunities are kept intact, which minimize human migration from watershed project areas. Convergence of Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme and other related schemes is an added advantage for watershed program to generate employment and minimize migration. Watershed development component of Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sanchay Yojana has generated more than 37.73 million men's days of employment, which also contribute to reducing in migration in the treated area, especially during the pandemic period. It has further acted as an enabler for reverse migration when the labor force are reverted to their native place and engaged with the watershed workforce. So these were the few interventions, and there are many, many other interventions in India which tries to reduce migration of the local people towards the urban area. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Estimate Delegate. Please, Oman, have the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the merciful and the compassionate. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the Secretariat for the tireless efforts that they undertake to convene and organize this meeting and to prepare the documents that we're scrutinizing herein. I'd also like to most warmly thank Côte d'Ivoire for their very kind and generous welcome to us. In point of fact, migration is triggered by various different causes. If we take the example of the Arab world, it's often triggered by the aridity of soil, drought, etc. And coupled with that, you have often the factor of the isolation of rural areas in our country. So it's both climatic and environmental factors that push local communities to migrate, to leave their home villages. Rural regions are often underdeveloped, and that is why I would ask the Secretariat to take steps to support countries who find themselves in such a situation, to give them an opportunity to take steps to develop rural areas and rural regions in order to put in place the necessary conditions that would allow rural communities either to return home or to remain. Several efforts that have been undertaken thus far have already provided Oman with some of said support, and that have been undertaken at national level. We've rolled out initiatives such as land restoration projects, reforestation projects in degraded areas. Moreover, the Green Belt project, launched in 2021, and which will cover the next 10 years, is another such initiative. And it is these kind of initiatives, countries involved in pursuing initiatives in this case too, that we would ask the Secretariat to support, whether that be technical support or financial support, to encourage them in the projects to restore land, and also encourage them in the initiatives they're undertaking to encourage rural populations to remain in place. I think that the global mechanism is an appropriate framework for this. We support the efforts of all in this understanding. Thank you very much.
You, estimate delegate, please, Ecuador, have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor, and a good morning to one and all. Human displacement is a complex phenomenon, and therefore it's difficult to attribute to the various migration flows we're seeing the fact that they be purely environmental in nature. There are often human factors that lead to migration, which means that migration, when all said and done, is a very complex and nuanced phenomenon. In that understanding, it's uncertain if we will be able to establish clear and convincing links between environmental issues such as climate change and land degradation and desertification and drought and human migration. Therefore, a key initial aspect that's vitally important that we need to pursue is that of drawing up methodologies and indicators that would allow us to prove those links, those adverse links, and that would allow us, in turn, to identify those migration factors that are human-made and those that are environmental. So we call upon the Secretariat to put together a methodology that will make sure that we can measure the link between migration and desertification, drought, and land degradation. We think that's essential. To conclude, we think it's important to make the point that migration cannot be seen as an adaptation to climate change measure, whether that be adaptation to drought or land degradation. It needs to be seen as a last resort for survival that is pursued by communities and individuals to prevent other harm and damage or further harm and damage. Thank you very much.
Bangladesh, have the floor.
Thank you so much for giving me the chance to speak a few words before you. There should have a special fund for the internal and external migrated people, especially for the forced migrated people. It's a matter of fact and experience that migration is occurred due to land degradation, drought, climate change, and so on. But I would like to draw your kind attention about the forced migration. Forced migration of 1 million people from neighboring country to our country has created enormous threat to our land, life, environment, biodiversity, forest, and ecosystems. And we are very much kind enough to give them shelter, food, medical care, etc. But with its scarce resources, we are trying our level best. But I think there should have an international cooperation in this regard and to solve this matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, estimated delegate. I thank you all for your statement. There are no more speakers on my list under this issue. I now invite the committee to turn its attention to the issue of gender. The committee has before it documents ICCD/COP15/17 and ICCD/COP1521. I now give the floor to the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat to introduce the document ICCD/COP15/17. Mr. Rokaya, you have the floor, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, document ICCD COP15/17 provides a summary of the actions taken by the Secretariat in response to Decision 24 COP14 on gender. It also contains a roadmap to be included in the UNCCD Gender Action Plan to provide impetus and a focus on actions relating to women and men and girls and boys as per Decision 12/COP14. In response to the request contained in the Decision 24/COP14, the Secretariat would like to highlight the following. The review of the national drought plans and reports submitted by parties as part of the study on the differentiated impacts of desertification, land degradation, and drought, launched during the Gender Caucus high-level event, revealed that the provision of tailored technical support on gender mainstreaming was an important factor to effectively address gender matters within the Convention. The Secretariat has developed a strategic note on capacity development on gender and started with the first series of trainings during the current reporting cycle. Women's access to land assets and other natural resources remains a challenge in many regions. The aforementioned study found that women are largely subject to discriminatory laws and practices. Women landowners range between 4% at the lowest to approximately 40% depending on the regions. Parties to the Convention can accelerate efforts towards more land ownership and inclusive policies that protect women's land rights. As such, women's participation in decision-making processes and initiatives related to the Convention remains a priority. At COP14 in India, 21% of delegates attending the conference were female and 79% were male. Monitoring and enhancing women's participation would be critical to achieve the objectives of the UNCCD Gender Action Plan adopted at COP13. Bringing together delegates, civil society organizations, and experts on gender and DLDD, the Gender Caucus has proven to be an effective platform to advance discussions on gender equality in the context of the implementation of the Convention. The caucus should be strengthened to support the acceleration of the implementation of the Gender Action Plan. As per Decision 12/COP14, a roadmap has been developed outlining key activities and measures to be taken by all UNCCD stakeholders to amplify these efforts. The roadmap outlines activities to be implemented by the parties, the Secretariat, the Global Mechanism, and other relevant institutions as appropriate at the national, regional, and global levels. It builds on the efforts of the parties in various domains while proposing new actions and measures that will accelerate the implementation of the plan. It also recognizes the need to partner with institutions at various levels to achieve these outcomes. Furthermore, document ICCD COP15/17 provides critical information on the efforts made by both the Secretariat and the Global Mechanism to mainstream gender into our operations, from reporting to scientific publications and transformative projects and programs. The UNCCD has contributed to filling significant knowledge gaps with the study that I just mentioned, as well as with the technical guide on how to integrate the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forest in the context of national food security. The technical guide contains a pathway specifically dedicated to gender matters. Draft elements for a decision on gender are contained in the document ICCD/COP15/21 for the consideration of the parties. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Aydara, for your statement. I now open the floor for any statement in connection with the report that was just introduced. Speaker, I request to keep a statement brief and concise so that I can give the floor to as many speakers as possible. I will take all comments and then giving the floor to the Secretariat to respond. Delegate wishing to take the floor are invited to press the button, please. Peru, have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. I'd like to bid a very good morning to the Secretariat and my fellow delegates here present. We'd like to thank the Secretariat for the presentation of the report under the agenda item gender and the importance of fully identifying that as a factor in all of our efforts tackling desertification and drought in Peru. We've been pursuing key efforts at the national level in order to mainstream gender in all of our public policies across the board, including in our efforts to combat climate change. Moreover, we have already rolled out a gender and climate change action plan. We have a National Climate Change Commission with full representation of women's groups from civil society. That body has drafted and is now implementing a 2022 work plan. We're very grateful for the fact that gender continues to be an issue that is supported and backed by the efforts of the Secretariat. And we also welcome the fact that this is also aligned with other biodiversity and climate change conventions, the other Rio conventions, that is cross-cutting above them all. We hope that the financial and technical support will be in place to support these efforts and to take advantage of complementarity and to avoid overlap or duplication. Thank you very much.
European, please, have the floor. Europe, please.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Chair. It is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the European Union and its 27 member states. It is a statement on gender equality, which is a priority under the Convention. It's a priority for the Secretariat of the UNCCD, and it's also a priority of the Global Mechanism. At the very heart of the challenges that we intend to meet at the 2030 Agenda is the key role to be played by women and girls. They're vital players and stakeholders in achieving those sustainable development goals. Women and girls are often impacted disproportionately by the impact and fallout of climate change, and in particularly by the degradation of land and soil, desertification, sand and dust storms, and drought. We therefore hail the opening of hail the fact that at the high-level opening of this COP15 there was a caucus on gender issues, a very welcome step to raise the profile of this issue. We welcome the roadmap and the supplementary and additional measures that have been proposed by the Secretariat to speed up the full implementation of the action plan for gender equality. We'd like to nonetheless underscore the the fact that we need to make sure that the plan is fully implemented and that it's communicated, its profile is raised through the regular production and presentation of reports on progress achieved, and these reports could also share as a vehicle for serving best practices in the different state parties. Gender equality and taking into account the specific needs of women and girls are cross-cutting factors that need to be specifically integrated in all actions under the Convention. If we fail to do that, it will be impossible to achieve economic, environmental and social development that is holistic and serves all. As a result of the aforementioned belief, we strongly support and back a cross-cutting approach to gender and ensuring a gender-sensitive approach in all learning programs, in all training programs, in all capacity-building issues spearheaded and led by the Secretariat in order to ensure that we can bring about a change of mindsets and hearts, that we can change norms and practices, that we can change and scrap stereotypes, and a change of law. The leadership and participation of all women and girls is vital in decision-making and implementation of this convention. In order to ensure that gender profile is given its due weight and that people fully understand the various forms of discrimination that can be suffered by women and girls, the European Union and its member states would like to propose to the Secretariat that they include a statistical approach, that they include the gathering of indicators linked to gender and gender equality in all their actions in order to support the latter implementation and changes to the implementation of actions under the Convention to ensure that they promote gender equality. Finally, we support the proposal that the Secretariat continue its collaboration with other bodies in order to improve the full implementation of the Gender Equality Action Plan and its related roadmap, particularly when it comes to the gathering of data. This in particular to plug the gap when it comes to the lack of disaggregated data that we currently labour under, particularly as this pertains to gender. I call upon all parties to make sure that we create a pro-gender space, particularly at the national level, in order to ensure that we bring about real and authentic change of the Convention to make sure that it is gender-friendly and gender-positive. Thank you very much indeed.
Please, Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Since rejoining the Convention in 2017, Canada has actively advocated for accelerated implementation of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in all their diversity into the approach and activities of the UNCCD. We are satisfied with the progress made so far in mainstreaming gender equality into the Convention's work and commend the UNCCD's strong performance based on the latest SWOP assessment. We welcome the development of the Gender Roadmap to guide implementation of the GAP for parties' consideration in alignment with the results-based approach. We also encourage the UNCCD to link and align its proposed corporate gender policy that will be elaborated going forward with other corporate strategies. As part of the Gender Caucus discussions happening this weekend and next, we will be looking at further regularizing the caucus and giving it perhaps an advisory role moving forward to provide views to the UNCCD on a regular basis and also to facilitate knowledge exchange between parties and other interested stakeholders. Finally, we'd like to note that within the UNCCD COP process, representation is far from being gender balanced in the delegations, 80-20 according to the breakdown presented by the Secretariat. This is a key area that we can work together on here. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. Please, Benin, have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, on behalf of the African Group, I would like to begin by congratulating you again on your election to chair the COP, and I take this opportunity to express our deep gratitude to the government and kind people of Côte d'Ivoire for their warm hospitality afforded us since our arrival in this beautiful city of Abidjan. And the Africa Group is honored to make this statement on the importance of taking into account gender in the UN Convention to combat desertification in order to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. In the context of the UNCCD, the gender issue may seem straightforward, but it's actually very complex in our region because of various socioeconomic, cultural, and purely cultural aspects. And in this context, the Africa region has taken note of the report from the Secretariat, requested by the COP pursuant to Decision 14, Part 2, regarding the global mechanism and competent bodies of the Convention, continuing to work within their respective mandates to help the states parties to mainstream gender and to implement the Gender Equality Action Plan. And we've constantly said that desertification and land degradation and drought issues jeopardize the survival of our planet, but they particularly jeopardize certain regions of Africa in the absence of concrete action. Between now and 2030, we will lose half of our arable land. There are also major disparities because desertification and drought especially affect vulnerable groups, especially women. The Africa region thanks the First Lady, Dominique Ouattara, for having organized the gender meeting on the 9th of May, the Gender Caucus, and for her having participated in contributing to the declaration that came out of it. We'd also like to thank the partners supporting certain countries in taking account of gender in the implementation of the Convention. And we commend the efforts of the Secretariat for having gender disaggregated data, which will make it possible to have gender-specific data monitoring. In the light of the proportion of women in the world, Chair, the issue of land degradation can only be resolved if resolutions take into account vulnerable population groups and gender equality. And it is in order to attain the objectives of the Convention that the Africa Group suggests that the Gender Action Plan be broken down at the national level in order to ensure there is ownership by stakeholders, particularly through launching an initiative in the context of the Convention to provide technical assistance and the support requested by countries requesting it. There's also a need to strengthen technical and economic capacity of women at all levels so that they may take effective part in decision-making, as well as the need to increase representation of women in decision-making processes internationally, the COP and other international events, and the development of a guide on land tenure, taking strongly into account gender with the support of the FAO. And I'd like to conclude by saying that taking into account gender will inevitably increase the income of our populations and enhance the security, the food security of our populations. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. Benin, please. Bangladesh.
Thank you so much for giving me the chance again. Climate change, drought, land degradation, desertification, etc. negatively affect lives, livelihood, health, safety and security of the population, especially women, and provokes people's decision to migrate or displace. Millions of people, including women, are displaced due to land degradation, soil erosion, riverbank erosion, depletion of soil fertility, soil population, soil pollution, water pollution, coastal salination, flooding, and agricultural disruption. It's a matter of fact and experience that Bangladesh is a climate vulnerable country. Among the affected people, women are most susceptible to climate shocks because of less diversification of their assets and minimum access to resources to cope up with and come around from the damage and loss. However, we know that women can play an important role in reducing and reversing land degradation. Women contribute to restore, protect, and improve land in a range of ways. That's why with our limited resources, Bangladesh is trying to its best to ensure gender equity. At the same time, we are welcoming and encouraging international cooperation and support through UNCCD Secretariat as well as global mechanism. I thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Thank you, Estimate Delegate. Please, Argentina.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to acknowledge and express gratitude for this document 17 and also the draft declaration and decision in document 21. We welcome the research that's been done, which are highlighted in this document regarding the differentiated effects of desertification, land degradation, and drought on women, and the obstacles faced by women in having access to land assets, and the problem of other aspects, particularly in the field of agriculture, livestock, and family farming, which is not remunerated, nor is the impact on health, labor integration, resilience, capacity in the light of desertification and drought. These are aspects which should continue to be considered. And we would refer to paragraph 50, which analyzes the recommendations and conclusions regarding gender inequality, which is a key factor which has to be combated, to mainstream gender with goals for neutrality, which is very much in line with SDG 15.3, and it has demonstrated the huge merit of the work in this document. We agree with the establishment of gender disaggregated data, and we also think that this is also the case regarding the questions on gender when national reports are to be produced. We suggest including an item, innovating and developing legislation and policies which lead to shared responsibility between men and women in domestic activities in the public and private sector. And as regards the draft decision, we emphasize that implementation of the Convention's communication plan and mainstreaming of gender and empowerment of women as an essential part of the messages in public awareness and outreach activities are essential, and we suggest that they be stepped up. As for 6, the participation of civil society organizations and their involvement in the processes of the Convention, it is essential for us to continue working with women's organizations and encourage this as much as possible as one of the main interested stakeholder groups. As regards policies and frameworks and sand and dust storms, we stress the importance of increasing women's participation in initiatives to tackle these phenomena. And we request in the follow-up document on the thematic issues and policy frameworks in 9 in the preamble that the second paragraph be amended, and we suggest that it read as follows: reaffirming that gender equality and empowerment of women and children, especially the most poor and vulnerable, and add rural women, indigenous women, women with disabilities that contribute significantly to implementation of the Convention. And then in the preamble, we highlight the importance of what is stated above regard to land tenure of women and access of and rights of women to natural resources. As regards the report on implementation of the Convention, this is a response, and Therefore, we call on the Secretariat to step up its support to countries to improve and expedite the development of programs and policies which are transformative in addressing the gender issue. As regards the initiative on drought, we request increasing even further the gender perspective, especially in the implementation of priority areas, so that national plans against drought of all countries are incorporated in such a way that the Secretariat may incorporate them and help the states parties with tangible early training to incorporate gender equality in order to meet all the goals of the UNCCD and national action plans. It is positive and valuable to foster legal and political frameworks which promote fair access of women and vulnerable populations to land and control thereof. We emphasize the importance of the COP here because it is cross-cutting and sheds light on all documents. We highlight sovereignty and strengthening of the autonomy of women, access and control over natural and productive resources in their countries, participation in the consultation process, in true governance and social justice, and environmental justice in decision-making in all aspects. We highlight the importance of women being able to promote and defend the right to life, the right to food, and the right to housing and health, and water, and a healthy environment. Lastly, as regards transformation towards a social organization with fairer care, let us think about sustainable development and recognize the social value of land as a fundamental aspect in sustainability of life on Earth. And this is where we need to focus on the central role of women. Thank you.
Please, United Kingdom, have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the UK, we welcome the inclusion of the Gender Caucus at the high-level opening of COP15 and commend the UNCCD Secretariat on their recent and improving UN SWAP scores and urge the Secretariat to maintain this high level of performance going forward. The interrelated global challenges of climate change, land degradation and biodiversity loss impact poor countries and communities first and hardest, with women and girls among those least able to cope. The findings presented in the UNCCD study launched at the Gender Caucus on the differentiated impacts of desertification, land degradation and drought on women